Alright, hello everyone, and welcome to part 2 of a video that no one asked for, where we're going to try and do some Unit 4 revision while doing a trail run in the Loaded Dirt Gorge or Loaded Dirt State Park. Something that no one ever wanted, but you're going to get it anyway. This time, to give you a little bit of a better reference of where I'm going, I'm going to show you on this map first, and then we're going to head out onto the trails. So we're going to start at the end of Swans Road in Darley in Bacchus Marsh around here. We are going to follow this onto the Blackwood Ranges track. Then once we get there, we're going to follow the Blackwood Ranges track all the way along. We're going to skip Link 2 and Long Point until we get to this junction here, and we're going to follow it along a cow's track till we get to Bear's Head. We're going to follow Bear's Head down to the river. Bear's Head's a really interesting trail where there's a little bit of ridge running until we get down to the river, and then there's not very many other places to go, so we're going to head back up and then follow a cow's track around until we get up to Mount Blackwood here. At Mount Blackwood, there's a tree filled with carrots. We're going to grab a carrot, we're going to feed it to a horse, and then we're going to come all the way back. This time we're going to go across Foxy Gully Road or Foxy Gully Track. Along this way, it's a bit foresty, it's really cool, until we get back onto the Blackwood Ranges track and follow it all the way back till we get to the Current Swans Road. Then we're going to come home via a cafe to get a milkshake because we're going to be very thirsty and hungry. That's it for this part. I'll see you soon on the trails. All right, it's 9 AM. Here we are at the start of Blackwood Ranges track. Time to get moving. We're going through Unit 4 economics, so budgetary policy, monetary policy, and aggregate supply side policy. See you soon. All right, so budgetary policy is all about how the government alters their receipts and outlays to manage aggregate demand. There's things like changing tax rates, infrastructure spending, all those kind of things to try and stimulate the economy or slow it down. There are three main types of budgets. A budget deficit, which is when outlays outweigh receipts. This is used to stimulate the economy. A balanced budget where they're equal. This never comes up. You're not going to have to know that, hopefully. And a budget surplus where revenues are bigger than outlays, which is used to slow the economy down when we are beyond our economic goals. With a budget deficit, it can be funded by borrowing from the private sector, borrowing from the RBA, or selling bonds to overseas. All of these have pros and cons. Borrowing from the RBA can take money out of the overnight money market and cause crowding out, which pushes up interest rates, which is obviously bad. Borrowing from overseas increases our net foreign debt, and then we have to live with the interest burden for future generations. So then how can the government use the surplus? Well, it's a little bit of the opposite. We can pay off some of our net foreign debt. We can save with the RBA, which can cause crowding in and decrease interest rates, which would have the opposite effect. Or the government can put money into special savings accounts for future generations, like the Future Funds earnings account. No economics here, just trying to show off the view from the top of the Great Dividing Range. Downhill time. So we've also got the underlying budget balance, which is revenue minus outlays, also less any future funds earnings, and the once offset budget assets. This gives us a more accurate budget outcome. The downside of that downhill is we now hit this uphill. But what a great time to tell you about automatic stabilizers, which are built into the budget to stabilize the level of economic activity in a counter-cyclical way. This is basically controlled by the overall value of welfare outlays and tax receipts. How this works is, say for example, Melbourne goes into lockdown like we have, all of a sudden unemployment starts to rise. If we didn't have automatic stabilizers, this would instantly mean that economic activity plummets. But because of automatic stabilizers, as these people become unemployed, they move from their income onto a transfer income, which maintains their living standards and mean they have an income to spend via private consumption spending, and it limits the overall negative impact on aggregate demand overall. When enough people start spending, this speeds up aggregate demand, which then sends a signal to businesses to employ more labour to meet this increased demand, which then gets these people off transfer incomes and onto regular working incomes, therefore working in a counter-cyclical way. Changing the rate of them would be a discretionary stabiliser, which is when the Treasurer deliberately changes things within the budget structurally. There's things like changing tax rates, changing welfare outlays, infrastructure spending, research and development grants, etc. Where the government's physically changing the composition of revenues and outlays to manipulate economic activity or aggregate demand. So an example of this, decreasing small and medium-sized business tax 25%. This is going to motivate businesses to invest and expand, increasing private investment spending, and therefore increasing aggregate demand. We'll talk about some more examples next time. Alright, other examples of discretionary stabilisers are the lower middle income tax offset, which is the $1,080 tax offset for lower middle income tax brackets. This basically means that people in these income brackets pay less tax overall, means they have $1,080 more disposable income. This should lead to an increase in private consumption spending, therefore an increase in aggregate demand, and therefore those flow effects to all of our domestic macroeconomic goals. Alright, we're on another uphill, so might as well start talking about the strength of budgetary policy. One of the best strengths to use is that it can target particular sectors. So it can target businesses of particular sizes, it can target certain income brackets, which makes it more effective in some ways than monetary policy, because it can target the areas of the economy which need to be stimulated the most. It's also really effective at stimulating economic activity in a downturn, because they can very quickly get more disposable income into the pockets of households, which can then lead to more private consumption spending and more aggregate demand. Alright, we are now at Long Point Track, which you may remember from the last time when we did the Unit 3 video. We climbed all the way up here from the dam. Not going down there today, because we're keeping on moving forward until we get to Bears Head. But now for some weaknesses of budgetary policy as stimulating economic activity. We have that there can be a long implementation lag, because any policy needs to be voted on in Parliament, both houses, which means that policies can take a long time to be implemented. Then we also have that there are political hurdles, because all parties seem to have their own vested interests, and therefore sometimes good policies or policies that are going to help the public the most don't actually get enacted. See, so we are just over 6k in, and the hills just don't stop. It's up and down and up and down. What you care about is monetary policy, which is how the RBA manipulates the cash rate to manage economic activity and aggregate demand. Really important to know. Any cash rate below 3.5% is considered expansionary, and above that is considered contractionary. So, if the cash rate changed from its current 0.1 and was increased to 0.25, this would not be contractionary, it would be less expansionary. Time for more downhill. Alright, we are 6.7k in and we've made it to Bears Head Track. We're going to go all the way down Bears Head Track. We're going to follow some ridges. It should look really, really cool. We'll talk more about monetary policy. What we'll say right now is that with monetary policy, there are two ways that the RBA manipulates monetary policy, mainly through open market operations or through unconventional means. Unconventional means aren't technically in the study design, so we're going to focus on open market operations, where the RBA will meet on the first Tuesday of each month. They will either announce that they're going to decrease or increase the cash rate, or all the times do nothing, and then they will either buy or sell government securities to financial institutions to increase or decrease the overall money in the overnight money supply, and increase or decrease liquidity to change the cash rate. When they want to decrease the cash rate, they'll buy government securities from financial institutions. This puts more money into the overnight money market, increasing liquidity because there's more supply of money, puts downward pressure on the cash rate. If they want to increase the cash rate, they will sell government securities. This means financial institutions take money out of the financial overnight money market. This decreases liquidity, decreases the supply of money in the short-term money market, and increases the cash rate overall. Now these are proper single track trails. This is where the good stuff happens. But while I've got you, might as well talk about transmission mechanisms. So things like the cash flow channel, which is when interest rates are decreased. It means that houses have more cash flow as they're paying less on their variable rate home loans, have more disposable income, therefore increased private consumption spending, increased aggregate demand. We have the availability of credit channel, which is all about if interest rates are high, there's not a lot of credit available, therefore not a lot of borrowing, not a lot more aggregate demand. If interest rates are low, credit is really available, therefore banks are willing to loan it out to almost anyone, which should increase private consumption, private investment spending, and increase aggregate demand. We have the exchange rate channel, which is where the value of the exchange rate, the value of the interest rate will affect the overall exchange rate, because when the interest rates are high relative to overseas countries, foreign investors will invest in Australian banks, creates more demand for the Australian dollar and appreciates the value of the exchange rate, and vice versa to depreciate it. I'm going to go for a run for a bit, so I'll see you later. All right, we're just about to tick over an hour in. I think we're about a third of the way. Don't actually know, I didn't measure out how far this long run is. So let's talk about strengths and weaknesses of monetary policy. Strengths is that the implementation lag is really short. Usually when they announce a decrease in the cash rate, the next day banks will hopefully pass on some of that as interest rate cuts. Another strength is that they are independent from the government and therefore free from bias. Weaknesses, however, is that there is a long impact lag. Because households and businesses need a plan for investment decisions, it will take up to 2 years to feel the full effect of interest rate cuts. Another weakness is that decreases on cash rate aren't that effective at stimulating economic activity in a downturn. It's because if consumer and business confidence is low, and because of the high household indebtedness ratio in Australia, low interest rates aren't enough to make people want to borrow more money because they're afraid they can't pay it back. Therefore, not totally effective at the moment at stimulating aggregate demand. Start to hear the river a bit now, which means we're getting close to the bottom. Down to that means we have to climb all the way back up. But it means we're also up to our last topic, even though we're nowhere near halfway through the run, which is aggregate supply side policy, which is all about cost cutting and efficiency seeking measures which aim to increase our productive capacity and therefore increase aggregate supply. All right, here's where things get more interesting. As you can see, we're walking along the side of this rock face. Not a lot to our right. Not going to talk a lot of economics here, but I just kind of want to show off how cool this part is. Also praising the grip on my trail shoes right now, because it would be very easy to slip on this part, which would not be ideal. We have just clocked over 500 meters of elevation. That's half a K straight up into the sky. It's going to be a fair bit more, but as the topic of efficiency is on the cards, you might notice that I'm always walking the uphills, and that's because when we've got over 20K of trail, if I'm inefficient and run too hard on the uphills, I'll blow out my quads and calves. I'll have no energy for the flat running and downhill running. Therefore, by walking them, I'm maximizing my efficiency and productivity so I can get home faster. We're still making our way up Bear's Head. I'm now 634 meters of climbing so far in the run. Let's talk about 4 of the main types of policies that the government can use to calculate aggregate supply. So first up, we've got education and training. For example, the job trainer program, which aims to increase the quality of human capital by basically giving education and training into areas where we have skill shortages. This is going to create a more employable and more productive workforce, therefore increasing our productive capacity and hopefully increasing our productive agri supply overall. The downside of this is there can be some impact lag for education and training. Sometimes, for example, if we put funding into schools, we're not going to feel the benefits of that funding for 10 to 15 years. Then we've got research and development, which is all about trying to conduct research into new either production techniques or technology. The main reason the government does this at the 45% tax offset from R&D is that businesses wouldn't conduct research and development without that, because there's some risk that there won't be any actual benefit from it. So why would they waste money on it? So by the government giving that, they'll actually attempt to do it, and hopefully there'll be a benefit, but there's no guaranteed benefit. Then we've got infrastructure spending, which increases the quality of the country's capital resources. For example, the Westgate Tunnel project. In the short term, this can create worse bottlenecks and limits on our productive capacity as it slows down travel times, etc. In the long term, it creates more employment, makes more efficient traveling, lowers cost of production, increases our aggregate supply. And the last one is subsidies. The most relevant one at the moment is the JobKeeper wage subsidy scheme, which paid wages for employees for some businesses and lowered their cost of production. This wasn't done to increase aggregate supply, it was done to maintain it. Because we were trying to get businesses to not lay off workers during the pandemic, and that was done in that way. So don't try and say it was put in to increase our economic growth, etc. It was done to try and stop it from shrinking as much. Downside with subsidies is that businesses can get reliant on them. So for example, after carbon money, offering 22 million on wage subsidies, but they only paid 6 million back, even though they were profitable through the pandemic. And that's it for those four. We're 12.5k in. We're almost at the turnaround point. We've almost 800 metres of work so far. We'll break a K before we get back. How's the sun shining through the trees? Day for it. Here we are at the turning point. This sign is full of lies. It says 15k back, it's really like 8.5. But I'll happily take the 15. And there's the view. It wouldn't be a trip over here unless we came, got a carrot, or two, and go feed a horse. Come on. We're at the 14.3k mark. Let's talk about tax reform and welfare reform. So tax reform is any deliberate changes by the government to manipulate tax rates or income brackets to essentially motivate people to return to the workplace, or motivate them to work harder and increase efficiency, or motivate businesses by lowering their cost of production, so they'll invest and expand, and therefore increase aggregate supply. So when you reduce income tax, like the $1,080 low and middle income tax offset, what happens is households have a higher disposable income. They see that they're paying less tax, and therefore they're more motivated to either return to the workforce or work harder because they're earning more. Therefore, this increases efficiency as our output per unit of input increases, and therefore aggregate supply increases as well. With welfare reform, it's all about decreasing the generosity of welfare to motivate people to rejoin the workforce. Again, they'll be earning a higher income, and therefore they'll be more efficient and increase aggregate supply. An example there is how JobKeeper slowly reverted back to almost the original level of New Start allowance. That meant that workers were better, unemployed people were better off trying to seek employment, and therefore earning a higher income. And then we've got a higher productive capacity because more people are in the labour force, and therefore we have a higher aggregate supply. Next up, we've got immigration policy, which is all about the flow of
translates human capital into and out of Australia. We've got three main channels of migration, but one is the most prominent and the most important. So we've got skilled migration, family migration, and special migration. Essentially, skilled migration is the main one we're going to look at. And what you need to know about the most recent times is that there's been net zero migration into Australia in 2020. Which obviously going to put limits on our productive capacity and decrease our aggregate supply, as it means there's going to be skill shortages that cannot be fulfilled. Because what skilled migration does is it brings in labour from overseas to fill jobs that cannot be filled by Australian labour. And therefore, that makes us more productive, increase our output per unit of input, increases our productive capacity, and therefore aggregate supply. We are on a Foxy Gully Road on the way back. It's a whole lot more foresty than the other way out. We've only got strengths and weaknesses of aggregate supply policies to go. Alright, let's talk strengths and weaknesses of aggregate supply side policies. First strength, it's great at creating non-inflationary growth because it increases our productive capacity and we're getting more output for the resources that we have as inputs. It means that we can have growth without causing demand inflation. It lowers cost of production and therefore decreases cost inflation. Then, it's also great at addressing structural issues in the economy. So because it can increase or improve our nation's capital resources, we can get more efficient in that way, increase our productive capacity, and therefore be better overall. Weaknesses, however, are both implementation and impact lags. A lot of projects might be announced and not start for a long time, or the benefit for them might not be start for up to decades. So obviously limits their benefit in the short term, as they're more a medium term and long term solution. And that is everything from Unit 4 economics. There's probably a few things that I missed here and there, but when I'm out on the trails for what will end up being about 3 hours, you're bound to forget a thing or two. Hope you enjoyed this. Any other footage from here on out is just going to be beautiful scenic trails. If you haven't, sign up to my revision lecture to hear all of this content without me being out of breath and being in a nice warm study. Have a wonderful day and I'll see you next time. Bye. We are almost done, about 2 k's left. Here are some beautiful panoramic views. It's just over midday and I'm very, very hungry into it. We have just cracked 1 kilometre of ascent. That's a lot of up. Alright, we are done. We did 24.1k in just under 3 hours. We're in the car, which is still here, which I was worried about when there was an earthquake that kind of a straight downhill over there. But it's time to start driving home down this dirt road to nowhere. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time. Bye.